Daniel Carter walked into the airport with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, holding her small hand. She was excited about their trip, her big brown eyes shining as she skipped beside him. Daniel smiled at her joy. This was supposed to be a special trip, just the two of them. After checking in, they made their way to the first-class boarding gate. Lily, wearing her favorite pink hoodie and sneakers, held onto her teddy bear. She looked around at the people dressed in suits and fancy clothes, then up at her father. "Daddy, are we really sitting in first class?" she asked. Daniel chuckled. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." When their boarding group was called, Daniel led Lily onto the plane. The first-class section was spacious, with big seats and soft lighting. Lily's face lit up in excitement. But as they reached their row, a tall woman in a crisp uniform stepped in front of them. "Excuse me, sir," the flight attendant said sharply. "You're in the wrong section." Daniel blinked. "No, I don't think so. We have first-class tickets." He pulled out his boarding passes, but the flight attendant barely looked at them. She folded her arms. "Sir, first class is for premium passengers, not economy travelers trying to sneak in." Her tone was cold, and she glanced at Lily's casual clothes and teddy bear with disapproval. Lily squeezed her father's hand, her smile fading. "Daddy," she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had dealt with rude people before, but no one had ever treated his daughter like this. He stayed calm and spoke firmly. "We paid for these seats. We belong here." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Monica, scoffed. "I don't think so. First class isn't for—" She hesitated, then sighed. "Let me see your tickets." Daniel handed them over. Monica barely glanced at them before shaking her head. "You must be mistaken. I'll call someone to escort you back to economy." Lily's face turned red with embarrassment. Passengers nearby turned to watch, some whispering. A man in a suit smirked, while an older woman frowned in disapproval. Daniel felt anger rise in his chest, but he refused to make a scene. Instead, he knelt beside Lily and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll handle this." Then he stood up and met Monica's eyes. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor." Monica rolled her eyes. "There's no need for that." "Just." Before she could finish, another flight attendant approached. She was older, with kind eyes. "What's the problem here?" she asked. Monica huffed. "They're trying to sit in first class, but—" The senior flight attendant took the tickets from Monica's hand and examined them. Then she looked up, her expression changing. "They belong here," she said firmly. Monica's face paled. "What?" Daniel gently placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Shall we take our seats now?" he asked. Monica opened her mouth to argue, but the senior flight attendant gave her a look. "Let them through." Monica stepped aside, her face tight with frustration. As Daniel and Lily settled into their seats, Lily whispered, "Daddy, why was she so mean?" Daniel sighed. "Some people judge others before they know them. But don't worry, sweetheart. The truth always comes out." Lily nodded, hugging her teddy bear close. The flight was about to take off, but this journey was far from over. As the plane started to take off, Daniel and Lily settled into their first-class seats. The soft leather seats felt luxurious, and the hum of the engine gave a sense of calm. Lily, still holding her teddy bear, looked out the window, watching the clouds roll by. She seemed to forget about the awkward moment at the gate, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort. Soon, Monica, the flight attendant who had caused the trouble, returned to their section. She had a forced smile on her face, clearly uncomfortable after the confrontation. Her voice was stiff as she spoke, almost too cheerful. "Hello, sir. Welcome aboard." But her eyes quickly flickered to Lily. She seemed to notice how Lily was dressed again. The other first-class passengers looked the opposite of casual, all wearing suits and designer dresses. The way Monica looked at them, though, made Daniel's stomach turn. Monica didn't greet them kindly like she had the other passengers. Instead, She bent down, almost too close to Lily, and said, "Isn't it a bit much for you to be in first class?" Her tone was sharp and judgmental, making it clear that she didn't think they belonged. Lily blinked in confusion, not understanding why the woman was so rude. Daniel's jaw clenched. He had been patient, but this was crossing a line. Lily, now looking uncomfortable, tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, why is she acting like that?" Her innocent voice cut through the tension, and Daniel felt a pang in his chest. Before Daniel could respond, Monica turned and started walking away, muttering loudly enough for others to hear, "I don't know how some people manage to get these seats." She was unaware that her voice carried, and her words hung in the air like an accusation. Several passengers glanced their way, some looking at Daniel and Lily with judgment, others clearly trying not to overhear. Daniel's face grew hot, but he kept his cool. He knew this wasn't the time or place to make a scene. He turned to Lily and gently patted her hand. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Some people forget that kindness matters more than what people wear." But Monica's behavior didn't stop there. As she passed by them again, she stopped and leaned down with a smug smile. "You know, sir, there's a whole section in economy for people who don't know how to dress for a flight." She said it so loud that the other passengers overheard. Lily, who had been quietly sitting beside her father, looked up at the woman with wide eyes. "I'm sorry, Mum," she said softly, clearly hurt. Daniel's heart broke for her. The innocent look on his daughter's face, mixed with the way Monica was treating them, was just too much to bear. Monica didn't seem to notice or care. She just turned on her heel, walking away without another word, leaving Daniel to sit there, trying to comfort his daughter. The rest of the flight was tense. Monica kept her distance from them, but the cold air of judgment seemed to hang over the father and daughter like a shadow. The other passengers seemed to quietly watch, unsure of how to react. Daniel tried his best to make the rest of the flight enjoyable for Lily. He told her stories, played games, and distracted her from the awkwardness surrounding them. But deep down, Daniel was determined to make sure that Monica would never treat anyone else like that again. The flight continued, but the tension didn't lift. Monica's rude comments had left an unpleasant feeling in the air. Daniel could see that Lily was trying to ignore the situation, but he knew it bothered her. He had never seen his daughter look so small and vulnerable. As the plane climbed higher, Daniel decided that he wouldn't let this go. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on them, some curious, others quietly judgmental. It was clear that Monica's earlier comments hadn't gone unnoticed, but no one had stepped in to defend them. Daniel understood why. Many people are afraid to speak up, especially when they don't know the full story. But he didn't need anyone else's support. He was Lily's father, and he was going to protect her from this kind of unfair treatment. Daniel noticed that Monica was trying her best to avoid them for the rest of the flight. She was still polite, but there was a noticeable coldness in her manner. Every time she passed their seats, she made sure to avoid eye contact. It wasn't the kind of behavior he expected from someone working in customer service. Daniel knew that Monica had made a mistake, but he didn't want to cause a scene. He wasn't the type to shout or get angry, especially not in front of Lily. Instead, he decided to take a different approach. A few minutes after the plane reached cruising altitude, Daniel pressed the call button. He didn't want to make things worse, but he knew it was time to address the situation. A few moments later, the senior flight attendant, the one who had originally intervened, came over. She smiled warmly at them, but Daniel could see the concern in her eyes. "Mr. Carter, is everything all right?" she asked in a gentle tone. Daniel nodded but didn't smile back. He had been calm up until now, but he knew it was time to speak up. "I'm fine, but there's something I'd like to discuss," he said, his voice firm but calm. "Earlier, there was an issue with the flight attendant in charge of our section." The senior flight attendant's face grew serious. "I see. I apologize for the inconvenience. Would you like to speak to a supervisor?" Daniel thought for a moment. He didn't want to escalate things, but he also wanted to make sure something like this didn't happen again. No, I don't want her to get in trouble, he said, pausing. I just want to make sure she understands how important it is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are. The senior flight attendant nodded in understanding. Of course, I'll make sure to speak with her about it. Daniel thanked her, and she left to handle the matter. As she walked away, Daniel sat back in his seat and looked down at Lily. She was quietly playing with her teddy bear again, trying to forget about the tension of the past few hours. Daddy, she said softly, looking up at him. Will she be okay? Daniel smiled warmly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Yes, sweetheart. People make mistakes, but we can always learn from them. Lily smiled back, though there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. Daniel could tell she was beginning to feel better, but he knew this wasn't over. He had made it clear that respect and kindness mattered, and he would continue to teach Lily those values, no matter what. As the flight went on, Daniel remained focused on his daughter, trying to make the rest of the trip as enjoyable as possible. He knew that no matter how small the battle, standing up for what was right was always worth it. As the flight continued its journey, the hum of the airplane was steady, and passengers began to relax. Some were reading, others were chatting softly, but the awkwardness from earlier still lingered in the air around Daniel and Lily. Daniel sat quietly, keeping an eye on his daughter, who was slowly starting to recover from the embarrassment. She was coloring in her notebook, occasionally looking out the window at the passing clouds. Just as Daniel was about to turn his attention back to the book he had brought with him, the cockpit door opened. A tall man in a crisp uniform stepped into the cabin. He had a calm, confident presence, and the flight attendants immediately greeted him. The senior flight attendant, who had earlier come to Daniel's aid, looked up when she saw the man and smiled warmly. "Captain Matthews," she said with respect. "Everything is going smoothly. We should be arriving on time." Captain Matthews nodded and turned to greet the passengers. As he walked down the aisle, he paused when his eyes met Daniel's. His expression shifted to one of recognition, and he smiled. "Mr. Carter," he said in a friendly tone, "it's great to have you on board. How's the flight so far?" Daniel blinked in surprise. He had not expected the captain to recognize him. After all, he had made a point of not drawing attention to his position as the owner of the airline, but the captain knew him, and now Monica would learn just who she had crossed. "Everything's fine, Captain," Daniel replied, giving him a polite nod. "But I would like to speak with you for a moment." Captain Matthews seemed to notice the tension in the air. He immediately looked at Lily, who was now drawing on her notepad. Then his eyes shifted back to Daniel. "Of course," he said. "Let's step into the galley for a moment." The two men moved toward the small section where flight attendants prepared drinks and meals. Lily was left alone for a few minutes, but Daniel knew she would be fine. He had explained to her that everything would be okay, and she trusted him. As they reached the back of the plane, Captain Matthews turned to Daniel with a more serious expression. "What's going on, Mr. Carter?" he asked, lowering his voice. "I saw that you seemed uncomfortable earlier. Was there a problem with one of my staff?" Daniel took a deep breath. He knew he needed to explain without making it seem like he was threatening anyone. "It's not about the flight, Captain. It's about how one of your attendants treated my daughter. Her name is Monica, and she was rude to us when we boarded. I don't think she realized who I am." The captain's eyebrows furrowed. What exactly happened? Daniel recounted the situation calmly. He explained how Monica had assumed they didn't belong in first class because Lily wasn't dressed in a suit, and how her comments had made his daughter feel embarrassed. He described how Monica had treated them with obvious disdain, not knowing that their tickets were for the first-class section. Captain Matthews listened carefully, nodding with understanding. "I see," he said after a moment. "That's completely unacceptable. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I'll make sure this is handled." Daniel gave a small nod. He wasn't angry. He just wanted to make sure that no one else would ever have to experience what Lily had gone through. "I appreciate your understanding, Captain," Daniel said sincerely. As they returned to their seats, Daniel noticed Monica walking past them. She seemed flustered, as though she had just been spoken to. Her gaze briefly met Daniel's, and she quickly looked away. She hadn't said a word to him yet, but it was clear that she was beginning to realize the mistake she had made. Lily, unaware of the conversation between the captain and her father, smiled up at Daniel. "Daddy, when do we get there?" Daniel smiled back. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." As the plane continued to cruise smoothly through the sky, Daniel could feel a growing sense of unease. He had done everything he could to handle the situation calmly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Monica's behavior had left a mark on him. The way she had treated Lily, the hurt in his daughter's eyes, it was hard to forget. Daniel glanced over at Lily. She was humming softly to herself, lost in her own world, coloring in her notebook. She seemed like she had almost forgotten the whole ordeal, but Daniel knew it would take time for her to truly feel at ease again. As much as he wanted to protect her from moments like this, he couldn't shield her from the reality that sometimes people were rude, unfair, or just plain ignorant. He shifted his attention back to the front of the cabin. Monica was still going about her duties, but there was something different about the way she was acting now. She had become quieter, her usual confident stride now replaced by a hesitant, almost nervous walk. Every time she passed their row, she seemed to avoid looking at them, her eyes quickly darting away. It was as though she could feel the weight of the earlier confrontation still hanging over her. Daniel wasn't sure if Monica knew that the situation had already been addressed with the captain, but he did notice her behavior was no longer the same. There was something almost apologetic in the way she carried herself now, but she hadn't yet apologized directly to him or Lily. He wasn't sure if she was too proud or if she just didn't know how to make things right. As the flight went on, Daniel's thoughts drifted back to the conversation he had with the captain earlier. He had been calm, not wanting to escalate things, but now he wondered if Monica knew who he truly was. Would she act differently if she did? It wasn't long before he got his answer. Around an hour into the flight, Captain Matthews reappeared. He moved through the cabin with purpose, nodding at passengers as he walked past. But this time, instead of continuing to the cockpit, he stopped right in front of Daniel and Lily's seat. "Mr. Carter," the captain said with a warm smile, "I just wanted to personally apologize for the incident earlier. I've already spoken with Monica, and I've made sure she understands how important it is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are." Daniel was surprised. He hadn't expected such a personal apology, but it was clear that the captain took this matter seriously. He nodded in acknowledgement, giving a small smile. "I appreciate that, Captain. It's important that my daughter learns that people should be treated with kindness, no matter where they come from or how they're dressed." Captain Matthews looked at Lily, who was still drawing happily in her seat. "I couldn't agree more. We pride ourselves on our service here, and I'm sorry that Monica made you feel otherwise." Then, with a serious look on his face, the captain leaned in slightly. "Mr. Carter, I'm sure you'll understand that I didn't recognize you when I first saw you. But now that I know who you are," his voice trailed off, as if he was trying to choose his words carefully. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Captain Matthews hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Monica, she didn't know who you were, Mr. Carter. If she had, she would have treated you with far more respect. She's still learning the importance of customer service, and now she's been given a very important lesson." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this turn of events. Monica hadn't known who he was. She hadn't realized that the man she had just humiliated in front of the other passengers was the owner of the airline. "I understand," Daniel said quietly, "and I appreciate the way you've handled this. Just make sure that no one else has to experience what we did today." Captain Matthews nodded. "Absolutely, Mr. Carter. We'll make sure that doesn't happen again." As the captain moved on, Daniel sat back in his seat, processing everything. He had expected Monica to act differently if she knew who he was, but he hadn't expected her to be so unaware of the person she was speaking to. This was a lesson for her, but it was also a reminder for Daniel that sometimes people made mistakes without realizing just how big of a mistake they were making. Lily, still coloring, looked up at him with a smile. "Are we almost there, Daddy?" Daniel smiled back, his mind still processing everything that had happened. "Almost, sweetheart, almost." The rest of the flight continued in a quiet, almost awkward atmosphere. Monica, the flight attendant, kept her distance from Daniel and Lily for the rest of the journey. Every time she walked past their seats, her movements seemed more hurried, as if she was trying to avoid looking at them. It was clear that the earlier confrontation with the captain had shaken her, but it wasn't clear if she fully understood the weight of what she had done. Daniel didn't pay her much attention. He had already done what he needed to do. The apology from the captain had been a nice gesture, but Daniel wasn't looking for special treatment. What mattered most to him was that his daughter was treated with respect. That was all that mattered now. Lily seemed to have put the awkwardness behind her. She had found a new distraction in the form of a small coloring book and crayons that Daniel had packed. She was lost in her world of bright colors and drawings of animals and flowers. Daniel smiled at her, proud of how quickly she was able to shake off the uncomfortable moments. Still, as the flight went on, Daniel noticed that something was different. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him from time to time. He didn't know if it was because they were all aware of the scene earlier or because they were curious about the quiet tension in the air, but he could sense that people were watching. As the plane began its descent, Daniel leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about how lucky he was to have Lily. She was strong, much stronger than most adults he knew. Her ability to stay positive, even after being humiliated by someone else, was a lesson to him. But just as he was lost in his thoughts, a soft voice interrupted him. It was Monica. "Mr. Carter," she said, standing at the end of their row. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at her. There was something different in her posture now. She seemed more subdued, almost apologetic. "Yes," Daniel replied, his voice calm but direct. Monica hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting to Lily, who was still coloring away happily. Then, with a deep breath, she finally spoke. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry for what happened earlier." She paused. "I was out of line, and I shouldn't have treated you or your daughter that way." Daniel studied her for a moment. It was clear that she was sincere in her apology, but he wasn't sure if she truly understood the impact of her actions. Regardless, he appreciated the effort. "Thank you, Monica," he said, his tone gentle. "It means a lot to me that you're apologizing, but I hope this can be a lesson. People should never judge others based on how they look. You never know who someone really is." Monica nodded, her expression serious. "You're right, Mr. Carter. I've learned a hard lesson today. I promise that it won't happen again." Daniel gave her a small smile, knowing that she was likely feeling embarrassed, but also grateful for the chance to make things right. "I hope so," he said simply. With that, Monica turned and walked away, leaving Daniel and Lily to continue their journey. Daniel watched as she moved down the aisle, her shoulders a little straighter than before. She might have made a mistake, but it seemed that she was learning from it. As the plane touched down, Daniel gathered their things and helped Lily put away her drawing supplies. They had made it through the flight, and though it hadn't been the smoothest journey, they were almost at their destination. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide with excitement. "We're here, Daddy. We're finally here." Daniel smiled, brushing a few strands of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart. We're here." And just like that, the troubles of the flight seemed to fade into the background as they prepared to step off the plane and into their next adventure. As the plane touched down and passengers began gathering their things, Daniel and Lily were among the first to leave their seats. Lily was practically bouncing with excitement. "Daddy, this trip is going to be so much fun," she said, her eyes sparkling. She had quickly put the earlier incident out of her mind, and Daniel was grateful for that. Daniel helped Lily collect her things, making sure she didn't forget her coloring book or teddy bear. As they made their way down the aisle, Daniel saw Monica again. She was still working, but her expression was different now. Gone was the air of confidence from earlier. Instead, she seemed quieter, more thoughtful. Daniel watched her closely, wondering if the apology had truly meant something to her, or if it was just an attempt to avoid further trouble. Just before they exited the plane, Monica approached them again. This time, she wasn't standing behind her cart or rushing past them. She walked up to Daniel with a slow, hesitant pace. "Mr. Carter, before you go," she began, her voice softer than before. Daniel turned to her, giving her a small nod. He had been expecting some sort of follow-up, but he wasn't sure what she would say. Monica took a deep breath. "I know I made a mistake," she said, her eyes meeting his, "and I just want to make sure you understand that I'm truly sorry for what happened. I shouldn't have treated you or your daughter like that, and I've learned a very important lesson today." Daniel was taken aback by how sincere she sounded. Her words weren't just a quick apology. There was real reflection behind them. It wasn't every day that someone admitted their wrongs so openly, especially when their pride might have been bruised. "I appreciate your apology, Monica," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. "It takes a lot to admit when we've made a mistake. I hope you'll remember this lesson, not just for us, but for every passenger you meet in the future." Monica nodded. "I will. I've learned that judging people based on how they look is unfair. I should have treated you with respect from the start, no matter who you were." She paused for a moment, then added, "And I've realized that kindness is much more important than appearances or status. I'll be better from now on." Daniel studied her for a moment, his mind processing what she had said. He could tell that Monica wasn't just saying the words to get away from the situation. There was a real understanding in her voice. "I'm glad to hear that," Daniel said finally. "But remember, it's not just about being nice when you know who someone is. True kindness is about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their status. Always." Monica smiled faintly. "I know, and I will." With that, she stepped back, allowing Daniel and Lily to leave the plane. As they walked through the jet bridge, Lily skipped ahead, excited to explore the new city they had arrived in. Daniel felt a sense of relief that the flight was finally over, and that things had settled. But he also felt proud of the way Monica had handled the situation in the end. As they stepped into the airport terminal, Daniel couldn't help but think that sometimes people learn their lessons the hard way. But as long as they truly learned from their mistakes, there was always room for growth. And maybe, just maybe, Monica would remember this day as the turning point in her career. "Are we going to the hotel now, Daddy?" Lily asked, tugging at his sleeve. "Yes, sweetheart," Daniel said, smiling down at her. "Let's go make some memories." And as they walked through the airport together, Daniel knew that this trip would be one they would never forget. The airport terminal was bustling with activity as passengers hurried to their gates, and the familiar sounds of rolling luggage and overhead announcements filled the air. Daniel and Lily walked together, hand in hand, excited to begin their adventure. But as they made their way toward the exit, Daniel's thoughts kept drifting back to the events on the plane. He hadn't expected things to unfold the way they had, but now that they had, he felt a strange sense of calm. He knew that everything had been handled as best as it could be. As they reached the front of the terminal, Daniel glanced over at Lily, who was still skipping along beside him, completely carefree. She had already forgotten the awkwardness of the flight. To her, it was just a bump in the road on the way to something much more exciting. And that was one of the many things he loved about her. Her ability to move forward without holding on to past mistakes. They stepped outside into the warm sunshine, where a car was waiting for them. Daniel helped Lily into the back seat, and then got in himself. As the car pulled away from the airport, Lily turned to him with a bright smile. "What's the first thing we're going to do, Daddy?" she asked. Daniel thought for a moment, enjoying the way her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Well, I thought we could start with a nice lunch. After that, we'll see what the city has to offer." Lily nodded eagerly, her mind already racing with ideas. She was ready for whatever came next, and Daniel was ready to give her the best experience possible. Meanwhile, Monica's apology had lingered in his mind. As much as he had appreciated her words, Daniel knew that her actions had been a reflection of a larger issue. The way people often judge others based on appearances. It was something that had always bothered him. But it seemed that Monica's own shift in perspective was a small victory in itself. The next morning, as Daniel and Lily enjoyed breakfast at their hotel, Daniel received a phone call. It was from Captain Matthews, the same captain who had recognized him on the flight. "Mr. Carter," the captain began, "I just wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. I've spoken to Monica, and I can tell that she's taking what happened seriously. She's very sorry for the way she treated you and your daughter. But more than that, I believe she's truly learned a valuable lesson about the importance of respect and kindness." Daniel listened carefully, surprised by how seriously the captain was taking the matter. "I appreciate the update, Captain," Daniel said. "It's good to hear that she's learned from the experience. I hope she continues to grow from it." "She will," the captain assured him. "I'm making sure that all of our staff receives more training on customer service, and I'll personally be keeping an eye on things moving forward." Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of relief. "That sounds like a positive step. Thank you for handling it so professionally." As the call ended, Daniel put the phone down and looked at Lily, who was happily munching on her pancakes. He felt a small sense of pride, not just because of the way the situation had been handled, but because he knew that Lily had witnessed an important lesson about standing up for what's right. He turned his attention to the day ahead. It was going to be a day filled with new experiences, and no matter what happened, Daniel was grateful for the journey they had already started. "Ready for our adventure, kiddo?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with warmth. Lily beamed at him, her enthusiasm never fading. "I'm ready, Daddy." And with that, they set out, knowing that their adventure together had only just begun. As the days passed, Daniel and Lily explored the city together, making the most of their trip. From sightseeing to trying new foods, everything felt like an adventure. Despite the earlier tension on the flight, both father and daughter had moved past it, their focus now on enjoying each moment. However, the story of what had happened on the plane didn't entirely fade away. In the days that followed, Daniel continued to reflect on the lessons learned. The journey hadn't just been about a vacation. It had also become a reminder of the importance of kindness, respect, and standing up for what's right. On their last evening in the city, as they sat at a small outdoor cafe watching the sunset, Daniel took a moment to look at his daughter. Her laughter filled the air as she talked about all the things they had seen, her excitement contagious. In that moment, Daniel realized that Lily had taught him something, too. She had shown him that no matter how uncomfortable a situation might be, it's always possible to move forward with a positive attitude. The next morning, as they prepared to return home, Daniel checked out of the hotel. He was feeling both satisfied with the trip and eager to get back to his routine. As he loaded their luggage into the car, a familiar voice called out to him. "Mr. Carter." He turned to see Monica walking towards him, her expression more relaxed than it had been on the flight. She approached with a small, genuine smile on her face. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, stopping a few feet away. "I've thought a lot about what happened, and I realized how wrong I was. I've learned a lot from this experience, and I'll carry it with me. I hope I can be better going forward." Daniel smiled, impressed by her willingness to take responsibility and learn from her mistakes. "I'm glad to hear that, Monica. It takes a lot of courage to admit when we're wrong and to make changes for the better. I appreciate the way you handled everything after we spoke." Monica nodded, looking relieved. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I'm really sorry for how I treated you and your daughter. It was a valuable lesson for me, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Daniel looked at Lily, who was standing nearby, her wide eyes observing the interaction. She smiled at Monica. showing no hard feelings. Daniel felt a warmth in his heart. It was a small but important moment, a reminder that even in a world full of challenges and mistakes, people could change for the better. And sometimes, those changes started with an apology and the willingness to grow. "It's okay, Monica," Daniel said, his voice kind. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." With a final nod, Monica turned to leave. Daniel and Lily climbed into the car, and as they drove away, Daniel thought about how everything had come full circle. The trip hadn't just been a chance for them to explore a new place. It had been a lesson in empathy, growth, and the importance of treating others with respect. The incident on the flight, although uncomfortable, had led to positive change for both Monica and for Daniel. It had been a moment of learning for everyone involved, especially Lily, who had seen firsthand that kindness and understanding could turn even the toughest situations around. As they drove towards the airport, Lily looked out the window at the passing city. "Daddy," she said, her voice soft but full of thought, "I'm glad we came here. It was really fun." Daniel smiled and reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "Me too, sweetheart. And remember, no matter what happens, always be kind. You never know how it can change things." Lily nodded, her smile lighting up the car. "I will, Daddy. I promise." With that, they headed home, knowing that the lessons learned during this trip would stay with them for a lifetime.